Okay, great. Let me share my screen and we will get into today's presentation. Okay, like I said, today's presentation is setting boundaries and identifying burnout. So if you guys want to, in the chat, if anyone has had to set firm boundaries, or if you have any experiences with burnout or addressing burnout and you feel like sharing that in the chat, that would be very helpful as we move throughout the presentation. So like I said, I'm Elizabeth Yoder. I work for ICSPS. I work in the Workforce Development Coordination. And what are boundaries? Boundaries in general are limitations that you place on those around you, whether that's in your work or within your personal life, and it's to benefit you. And so you want to determine what you will and will not accept from those that are around you, whether that's in your time orientation with your work, your workload, how do you want other people to communicate with you? It all comes across in various different ways. And we present them in forms of behaviors or tasks. And how do we say that to other people? Are boundaries important? Yes, overarchingly, boundaries are very important within our working relationships with those that we work with, whether we are providing customer service or whether we supervise other people. Boundaries are very important for us. And as we move into this presentation, you'll also understand that boundaries help to alleviate and postpone long-term burnout as we work in certain fields that we may be in, like service fields or healthcare fields, things like that. They're going to help us maintain professional relationships, and they're going to enable us to perform our tasks very well or in a clear and concise manner while we also safeguard what is important to us, like our time, energy, and our ethics. And this is an interesting little quote that I like to present when I'm talking about burnout and with boundaries. Walls keep everyone out. So whenever we've gone through something that might be traumatic in our lives, we may place a wall up, but then the boundaries that we place once we've worked through that teach other people where the door is so that they can communicate with us and they know how to communicate with us most effectively. So it helps us to take accountability for our own happiness and well-being in our work relationships. And in today's world, having come out, as many of you probably hear often, when we've come out of a national and a worldwide pandemic, understanding what our boundaries are and healthy boundaries is very important, especially for younger generations. And what are the types of boundaries that we have, and what do we see within those boundaries? And some of them may be physical boundaries, so our distance away from other people, emotional or mental boundaries, communication boundaries, as well as time boundaries. And we'll get into those as we move throughout. What are some healthy and unhealthy boundaries? So healthy boundaries are clear and transparent. They're adaptable to circumstances and to people. So we may have boundaries for ourselves, but we also know how to adapt those boundaries when it comes to different people that are around us, especially if we're supervising other people. We want to be able to manage and understand how to manage different people in different areas as we go through our work day. So we may be working with one group of individuals and they communicate a certain way, and we may have another group of individuals who communicate a different way. And we want to understand that. It's also a healthy way to understand how do we manage people if we have a hybrid office. So if we have individuals who are working in person, but we also have individuals who work fully remotely. We want to understand how do our boundaries and how do we adapt within those boundaries to best serve those people. So like I've said before, you want to create your boundaries for yourself. You don't want to let other people dictate to you what those boundaries are and how those boundaries are important to you. So make sure that you have a voice in what you're saying, especially in your workplace. And if you don't feel like you have a voice to say what your boundaries are, make sure to try to identify someone who can help you with that, especially if a unhealthy boundary is with an employer or with a direct supervisor. You want to try to find somebody who you can communicate those boundaries with and then work with that person or persons to help you communicate with the person that you might have an unhealthy boundary with. So some of those unhealthy boundaries can be dominating or toxic or unnecessarily restrictive. They can include unreasonable work hours, bringing work-related stress home with you, which that can make us go into further stages of burnout, which we'll also get into. Persuaded to agree. So this is when we have boundaries in place, but we haven't been able to stick to those boundaries with the people that we work with. And they make us feel like we have to be agreeable. We have to be yes people all the time, which then relates to an unhealthy boundary type. And we have a distorted sense of priorities. So maybe we have our own personal values, but our values don't work with what that office or the employer's values are. So that creates an unhealthy boundary type. We have a dealing with troublesome coworkers. One of my most favorite phrases that I've been told throughout my professional career is by human resources individuals, and they will say, you want to make unhappy employees happy. You want to make disgruntled employees gruntled. So you want to figure out what makes them so unhappy, what makes them so disgruntled. And maybe that's a projection or a displacement onto something that's going on around them. Maybe they're in a later stage of burnout and they don't know how to communicate healthy boundaries. So they're showing themselves as being highly disgruntled. Or maybe something else has happened and the communication barrier is there and we can't quite figure it out. And one that happens a lot with people that I see whenever they become unhappy or they feel like their boundaries have been pushed is whenever they get that lovely dreaded line on a job description that says and other duties as assigned. And someone turns like there's turnover in our workplace and we get assigned a coworker's task and we're unhappy about that. And it adds unnecessary stress to us. And it's kind of just a, oh, by the way, you need to get this done type of thing. So our expectations get a little muddied and we need to figure that out. And then we need to reevaluate what our boundaries are in relation to that. So how do we set boundaries at work? So regardless of what stage you are working in your employment, whether you're the CEO, whether you're self-employed, you're a supervisor of a team, or you're just starting out in a professional career, everyone should be setting boundaries and looking at what makes you most productive in your workplace and how do you set those clear boundaries? How are you going to establish those with the people around you? So if you're just starting out, or even if you're in a supervisory position and you want to set boundaries from the very beginning, start that in the interview process. So start communicating those boundaries, those time-oriented boundaries. Here are your working hours. Are they flexible? Are they not? Will you have a work phone? Will you not have a work phone? What does it look like to have that device? Do you have a work-specific laptop? Do you have work-specific materials that you need to take home with you or that stay wherever you're working at with your desk? You know, what does that look like? What are the boundaries, whether they be physical or not? You want to be starting that communication process from the very beginning. And especially if you've never been in a professional career before, you want to be asking those questions at the very beginning, which is the interview screening process and getting into those later stages of the interviews. So what are your priorities outside of work? So, like I said before, we have values, we have our own limitations personally, and do we need to express those in our work environment? So determine those priorities for you, especially when it comes to time boundaries. So I know for myself, I work remotely the vast majority of my week. So I set time boundaries for myself. I have coworkers who will do time blocks in their schedules and on their calendars that we can all see within our office. So if that's what's going to work best for you to communicate that boundary, to start that process of setting boundaries with other people by blocking off time sets in your calendars, go ahead and do so. If you have individuals who have a tendency to work at 9 p.m. and you stop working at 4 p.m., then set an out of office, make them aware that your time boundary ended at 4 p.m. and you'll get back to them when you start work the next day. Just because they work until 9 p.m. or 11:30 p.m., I know I've gotten emails that come through at that time because someone else, that's when they work. That's what works best for them. but set an out of office so that they can clearly see you're not there and that their information is still important to you, but it's going to get answered when it's also important for you, and that's when you start work. So again, if you have a work device, put it away. If you need to put that work device away, then put it away when you need to, or communicate when you need to have that separation. Again, talking in a very clear and concise communication strategy. I know a lot of times you'll see a sorry to interrupt you, sorry to be a disturbance, apologizing over and over and over again. And if you know things about dialectical behavioral therapy models, there's one that is called FAST, and that basically explains that you want to be fair to yourself, you want to validate your own feelings and your own emotions, and you want to reduce the amount of apologies that you provide to other people because of how you're feeling in a situation, especially when it comes to boundaries. And if you have difficult coworkers or difficult employees, and they're constantly on you, or you have people who are constantly disrupting you throughout your workday, you want to reduce the amount of times that you apologize because what you need to get done is just as important as what anyone else is doing. And you want to stick to your values. So, like what I said earlier, identify what is a priority to you outside of your work. Identify what your values are. Do they mirror what your organization or your company that you're working for? Are they just personal values that you want to fulfill? Are they personal goals and aspirations that you have within your own working relationships? And then you want to be honest. You want to be truthful, as transparent as you can be with everyone. And be firm. Be firm with what you want. Be straight to the point. And don't be afraid that if you're communicating these things repeatedly and you feel like you're at a dead end over and over and over again, you want to find someone that's going to advocate for you. Not only be an advocate for yourself, but advocate for those around you. You want to make a very inclusive and fair environment for everyone so that they can be heard and that your work can get done to the best of your abilities. And this is one that is kind of hits all of the boundary types. So avoid inappropriate conversations. So this is inappropriate of what it means to you, what inappropriate is. If you're sitting there and someone is discussing, a birthing story, or someone is discussing a night out at a party, for instance, what makes you feel that the conversation is inappropriate? Is it inappropriate? Do you feel like you can get up and walk away? If you need to get up and excuse yourself from a conversation, then by all means do so. If providing personal information is not something that you want to do, then that is a strength and that is something that should be supported for you. I know for myself, I do not befriend my coworkers on social media. I will explain to them things that are going on in my life. I will have a positive working relationship. I will share details about my life, but I don't put anyone that I work with on my social media until after I've chosen to leave a position, if I've ever chosen to leave the position. I feel like that's a strong boundary for myself, and I like to keep it that way. Refraining from engagement in gossip, the water cooler talk, is fine, but we also don't know if other people around us are going to take what we talk about and turn it around or go to somebody else and keep that ball rolling. So we want to be mindful of what we're talking about and keeping a very professional stance when we're engaging with people in the workplace. And take breaks. If you're not allotted breaks previously in your working day, try to incorporate those, add breaks into your calendar. Like I said, I work remotely majority of the week, so my breaks are when I take my dog out on a walk, and it clears my mind from the work that I've been doing. It gets me away from sitting in front of a computer screen for the majority of the day, which I do. And I don't feel guilty about doing this because when I come back, I have a clearer sense of what I'm completing for the day, and I have a refreshed perspective on something that I've been working on. So feel like you can take breaks, communicate that again with somebody that's, that you're working with, put that on your calendar, ask if it's appropriate, if you can take a walk around the office, or if you can take a walk outside during your lunch break, something like that. Remove yourself from your desk at lunchtime. If you have 30 minutes to an hour, remove yourself from that space. Don't be expected to continue to work. I know a lot of people continue to work through their lunch and they feel like they need to be on top of answering everything as it comes through, but take that time off. If you take vacation time, take that time to rejuvenate and become a better employee long term. Another kind of hot topic when it comes to work and boundaries is saying no to things. Be strong in saying no at work. It is okay to say no at work. A lot of times people don't want to say no and they want to say yes, and then they end up overworking themselves and feeling very stressed out. So when we feel guilty, it's not to be rude. We're not being rude. We don't need to feel guilty whenever we're saying no. We're setting a very firm boundary, and we can practice with people around us. So we can practice in our personal life. We may be very strong in our personal life to say no to someone, but in work, it might be more difficult. So practice with people that you trust. Practice on friends or a partner. It's not a crime to decline something, and it might make us feel uncomfortable to begin with, but don't feel like that needs to happen all the time. And you want to always be making sure that you put yourself as the priority over what you need to get done. You need to be the best version of yourself in order to get everything done for everybody else. Okay. And stick to a routine. I've touched on this before, but make sure that you're sticking to a routine. If that's starting out with a physical boundary of I will start my workday at this time, I will end my workday at this time, I will take my lunch at this. If everyone has calendar access, mark that off on your calendar. Set an out of office like what I've said before. It maintains a practice and it allows your coworkers to be aware of your time constraints in your day. You want to make sure that you're openly discussing this with everyone, and it helps to combat overtime and working longer than what you're contracted to do, especially if you work fully remote or off-site. You have a tendency to keep working, especially if you're utilizing your work computer for, if it's just sitting right there and you keep seeing it, more inclined to answer those emails that come through, especially if we don't exit out of those Outlook or Google messages or what have you, whatever you use, your Teams messages. I know when my partner comes home, for whatever reason, those things are not closed out. And so throughout the night, we just hear the Outlook dinging, and occasionally I'll go, can we close that out? Mute the computer, because let's have time away from work and we're here doing personal things. When we talk about work too, we oftentimes will talk about reducing the barriers at work, but here we want to create barriers. So you want to, again, if you're working fully remote, you want to create a barrier to what you're doing. So physical separation, whether that's having a very specific office within where you work, if you're working at a dining room table, putting all of your materials away at the end of the day and putting them in a bag so that you reduce overworking. And if you impose barriers by separating your personal and professional life, you're also increasing interpersonal boundaries as well. So you're setting interpersonal boundaries is essential to, again, safeguard your values and your privacy. And it might include, like I said before, how I don't add coworkers to social media, and it allows for my personal life and my work life to be even more separated. And my ability to feel empowered about what I share to other people, it reduces what other people might be talking about, or if they see something and they want to bring it up. I have the ability to bring up what goes on in my life with my coworkers. And most importantly, don't be afraid to address boundary violations. So take charge. whenever you've set those boundaries in place, make sure that you're addressing those if somebody pushes your boundaries or you've communicated it repeatedly. Make sure that you're telling them, hey, I've identified that you keep pushing my time, or you are constantly interrupting when I have a meeting and it clearly, I've communicated this to you, I talk to you about this all the time. You know, don't let it fester. Don't let it go unaddressed, especially if it's a physical boundary. If you have a personal bubble, which I hope a lot of us do, and someone comes into our personal bubble, let's take a step back. Let's reevaluate how we can communicate. And again, go to those people who are around you to help advocate for you as well. Remove yourself from uncomfortable situations and then communicate that afterwards if that's a necessity to you. So again, boundary setting helps you prioritize your needs over what other people want. Okay. So what is burnout, and have you ever experienced burnout? Do you know anybody that has ever experienced burnout? And setting boundaries helps us to identify burnout. Setting boundaries helps to alleviate us going into burnout at a faster rate. Excuse me, need a drink. So some of us have probably seen the iceberg effect. So this is an example of it with burnout. So what we can see, previously I talked about projection and displacement on other people, and that is at the surface, right? So we're on edge, we're spacing out, we're irritable, we're fidgety. But then what's going on underneath? And that's the part that helps us whenever we're setting boundaries. The part that's underneath the surface is going to help us to communicate when something big like burnout comes to play. And so what is burnout? What does it look like? How do we address it? What are the stages? And we're going to get into that real quick. So burnout occurs when an employee becomes exhausted, frustrated, disengaged, unmotivated. It occurs when a person is both physically or mentally drained, excuse me, which causes employees an inability to work productively as they normally would. So you have a lack of interest, enthusiasm, you move slower, you're disengaged with the people around you. It can also come into your personal life. I know for myself, when I've experienced longer stages, excuse me, goodness, longer stages of burnout, I would want to sleep more often. I would work a very long work day, about 10, 12 hours, and I would come home and I would want to go to sleep. So my quality of personal life, my quality of work life was was taking a turn. And that is how I started to realize. So in the corner here on this slide, you can see there was a Society for Human Resources Management survey within the last calendar year reported 44% of U.S. employees feel burnout currently. And so that's not a large number. I think it's a bit low, honestly. I think that there's a higher number of individuals who feel burnout. They just might not be fully aware that they're in burnout just yet. So what can cause burnout? So these are several things that can cause burnout. So excessive workload, like I said, for myself, when I felt burnout, I was working 10 to 12 hours in a helping profession. And a helping profession, as you can see on the bottom of the list, this is first responders. These are people who are providing a lot of customer service, a lot of maybe crisis intervention, anything that you might be taking on a lot of what other people are feeling. You're taking in that secondhand trauma that is around you. You might have values that are mismatched from your employer. That's something that I've talked about here throughout this presentation. You might be in a toxic or hostile work environment. This is also very important to note as well, because that can catapult you into later stages of burnout very quickly. You can have unclear expectations, a lack of communication. This can add to feelings of a lack of control in your work. You could have unfair treatment. There could be biases towards who you are by those that are around you. And that'll make you go into burnout as well. A lack of recognition. So not, having that extra work, if you have a lot of turnover and you're asked to do extra work from other people's roles and responsibilities, and you're not getting the proper recognition for that, then, you're going to be in burnout. You're just going to feel that keep going and keep going and keep going. So 87% of employees feel dread at least once a week. I feel like that's a lot higher as well because there's a day where you wake up and you're like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to be there. I don't want to deal with this person. I don't want to deal with that person. I don't want to deal with this meeting or that, whatever it might be. And so we're going to feel dread. We just are. That's the way that we are. And if you're in an early stage of burnout, then you can get through that as we progress. And we talk about what is normal versus what is not so normal in terms of stress. So normal stress is, you experience your routine. It's work-related stress. It might be a presentation that you have to get through, and you're working on a team, and somebody might be lagging behind, or they just got back from a vacation, and you've got to get this done. It's short bursts of stress that you can effectively cope with throughout your life. You have effective coping mechanisms that can get you through that stress. Whereas burnout, your coping mechanisms aren't working. So you're experiencing that stress on a daily basis and you have a harder time managing it and you have a harder time communicating that with other people. So your behaviors begin to change and those around you start to notice that your behaviors are changing. So you're going to start to look for a different job. Perhaps you're going to refrain from engagement. You're going to take more days off. You're going to think, okay, well, I could slip out at the end of the day a little bit sooner and that'll be fine. I can come in earlier, I can leave sooner. I know I did that pattern with a previous job where I was coming in about 40, 50 minutes earlier than everyone else because I could get through a lot of my stuff that I needed to do and then having the bulk of the day have to deal with people. And then I could leave and then get through my evening routine a little bit sooner so I didn't have as much stress at the end of my day. And so what are some of the stages? So these are 5 overarching stages of burnout. And I brought this slide up on another presentation a while back, several months ago with some people. And excuse me, an individual pointed out the honeymoon stage. So usually when we start new jobs, we're very enthusiastic, we're optimistic, we have a drive to prove ourselves. Excuse me. So why would honeymoon stage be at the start of burnout? Why would that be the number one stage? So if anyone has ever gone through mental health first aid or you've worked in mental health or you have some training in mental health, you'll understand that trauma continues on if it's unaddressed. So you can have secondary trauma, you can have compound PTSD. And the honeymoon stage of burnout is just that. It's if you've left a toxic, hostile work environment previously, if there have been a lack of boundaries, a lack of effective communication before, you're still going to be enthusiastic and optimistic about the job or the role that you're going into, but that underlying stress, that underlying trauma is still going to be there from your previous work environment. It will be a mistrust, it'll be a difficulty to read those people that are around you moving forward. And so you're going to still be in that honeymoon phase. You're still going to be very optimistic about what you're doing. However, all of that stress can be catapulted into one of these 2 to 5 stages of burnout if it doesn't go addressed. So if you're not effectively communicating with the next boss or with the next set of coworkers, hey, this happened here. I want to alleviate that in this role. Or can you please communicate this way to me? And this is how I prefer to be communicated with because of experiences that I've had before. You'll kind of be able to add an extra layer of gaps between the first and second set of burnout, or the stages of burnout rather, because you're communicating that with the next employer. So they're going to be able to understand you a little bit better to help alleviate that. So these are five overarching. There are 12 very in-depth stages of burnout, which you're going to see right here. So these are very in-depth. This kind of goes through more of the five stages broken down even more into what you could see as behaviorally, or if you're watching somebody go through the stages of burnout and they don't know that they're in burnout, how do you as an employer, how do you as a supervisor or a manager help that person? How do you help those people in your personal life if you see this? I know for myself, so prior to coming to work with ICSPS, I was in mental health and substance use for over 15 years. And whenever I ended my journey and my career as a supervisor in mental health, I was at stage 11 in burnout. And at the same time of being in stage 11 of burnout was a worldwide pandemic. And so I had that compound burnout going on. So I was in a very difficult place of how do I navigate my personal life? How do I hold on to that? How do I harness my personal life and not jeopardize my relationships within that while still being in such a low state of burnout where I'm lost. I don't know what I want to do. I have a national worldwide pandemic going on. I can't go anywhere. I can't do anything that would normally be a hobby of mine. So I had to reevaluate what was going on in my life and identify what was the journey that I wanted to go into next. What roles could I take that would still allow me to help serve other people the way that I wanted to? And the goal of my career is when I started of helping other people, but also how do I address the burnout? How do I address the low energy, the sleeping all the time, working long hours? So I set a very strict boundary with myself and with my employers moving forward. But here are my boundaries. Here are what I'm going to communicate with you. This is when I'm going to say no. This is my emotional boundary. Here's my time boundary. Here's my physical boundary. And so working in the job that I have now, my coworkers and my employer are very aware. And I am very clear and concise about my communication with them on how they can best manage me. How do I best communicate with them? And how can we work together? Because I know, having been in such a long stage burnout, that I can physically feel myself on certain days feeling that dread and not wanting to do something. So I communicate that. I identify it, I validate it within myself, and then I communicate it with other people. And so we can address that very specifically with what can we control. So there's a thing called the circle of control. And so if we see reactive individuals, they tend to focus on this outer lying piece of what is on the picture here in front of you. And the proactive individuals focus on what is inside the circle. So when it comes to setting boundaries, when it comes to addressing burnout within yourselves, you want to start to design what is in your circle of control. What can you control? What is outside of that circle? So if you think about it in terms of what within your daily work life, what does that look like for you? What are the things inside the circle that you can control, and what are the things outside of the circle that you can't control? Who can control what's outside of that circle? You know, is there another individual who can control that and that you have a good, strong working relationship with? So if it does impact you, you can communicate that to someone else. Okay, so you want to keep thinking that as you go. I really highly encourage everyone to make a circle of control if you've never done that before. It does help you, especially when you're starting to set boundaries with people, to understand what is within your scope in your job and what isn't in your scope within your job. And so the circle of control, it promotes a more proactive mindset. So if you know someone who is more reactive in nature and they start to develop a circle of control, they can become a more proactive individual. It's going to help us improve our mental health. So if we use mindfulness techniques like journaling, exercising, setting goals, setting those SMART goals for ourselves, for our teams, it's going to encourage a stronger mental health process overall. It allows you to become more flexible in life when you understand what you can control and what you can't, and you can understand the different outcomes that may come with what you can't control as well as what you can control. You'll start to accept things that cannot change as well. And that kind of the arrows are going down, but then it also kind of goes back up as well. And an important piece that we saw coming out of this worldwide pandemic too is a stronger virtual component to our work. I don't know how many people participating are hybrid employees or fully virtual, but we know that virtual employee wellness programs are very critical to promoting positive health for the remote first work environment. We want to be engaging just as much with the virtual employees as we would with the employees that are in person on a day-to-day basis. So you want to have frequent check-ins with them since again, you're not having that face-to-face. When you have your meetings with them, have that period of, a fun little icebreaker or, engage with them for a little bit longer, ask them for feedback. You want to be asking for, what is their work-life balance? What are they incorporating that's going to keep them and their boundaries in place? So that they will work and become a long-term employee with you if they are going to stay fully virtual. So building up a stronger collaboration, making sure that you have those resources in place to make the virtual employees feel just as supported as an employee that would be in person on a regular basis. And so if you are a manager or a supervisor, how do you help employees with burnout? So you reach out to those people who you might identify as struggling, or if you think that they're struggling, have that conversation with them. Take a touch point with that individual. Send out satisfaction surveys. Ask how you can address your management style. Self-reflect. Be mindful about how you communicate with those that are around you as a supervisor. Always be asking and assessing if the way that you're doing your job is most beneficial to those that are around you. Always provide recognition for tasks that are done. Provide that workplace variety. So, advocate for those individuals if you have the ability to create a hybrid environment for employees. Allow that to happen. Have a little bit of flexibility, even if your employer is saying, well, we have a very rigid way of doing things, communicate that with your team. Have that ability with your team to say, I understand that this is a difficulty for us as an overarching corporation or organization, but if you need to work from home one day, if you have sick children and you can still just be as effective working from home, do so. Do your work the way that you can best get it done if that is applicable to where you work. Encourage relaxation. So encourage those bursts of breaks throughout the workday. Encourage them to take time away from their computer, away from their desk, and engage in something that is not as strenuous as what the work is, especially again, if we're in helping professions. We want to disengage for a little bit to get our brain back into a more positive state. And always be asking how you can support the people that are around you. You always want to ask if what you're doing is enough for them. And then have them ask you the same thing, if what your employees are doing, is it enough? Can they help you? If you have a supervisor, I hope that they ask you the same things as you're their employee. And how do we address our own burnout? So again, throughout this whole thing, we've wanted to set boundaries, we've wanted to take breaks, we want to prioritize our self-care and identify our stressors, and we want to maintain our social connections, practice mindfulness, prioritize sleep. That's a good way of getting our body back into a positive rhythm. Exercise, whatever that exercise may be for you. I take my dog on a very long walk. I like to do a rowing machine. I do water sports. Those are things that are very important in terms of exercise for myself. I find great enjoyment out of them. Talk about how you're feeling to your boss or to a coworker that will help you guide yourself. Seek professional support, and this doesn't necessarily have to be seeking therapeutic services, but if you have a strong faith base, then if that's something that is very important for you to seek that professional support, if you want to seek a mentor, I would encourage people to seek mentorship outside of their uh, corporation or their organization that they're working with to get an outside perspective of what it is that's going on. But also, you could get a mentor within. They would have a different perspective as well. And you want to utilize your time off to disconnect. So, again, if you have that work phone, or if you have work computers and you want to designate the time when you can and can't. I know it for many years when I was working in mental health and substance use, I was on call for many hours. So if there was something that was very important for me, I would say, please don't contact me between this hour and this hour. And then if it is a big, huge crisis, a huge emergency, please contact this person who I've already communicated with that I will be unavailable for that time. Or send me a text message first, and then I'll read that, and then I can have a longer conversation later. Okay. So we're at the end of today's presentation. It was very overarching. It wasn't too in-depth for anyone. So we could go into a lot of things here that are very in-depth later on if that's of interest to anyone. But is there any questions, anything that anyone would like to have answered? I don't see anything in the Q&A box. But is there anything that anyone would like to have addressed further in another series? We can bring in somebody else as well to bring out some of the topics to be more in depth. I would encourage people, if you've not gone through mental health first aid, to go through that training with the people that you work with. It will go through more in depth with oh yeah. Are we receiving a copy of the slides? Yes, you will. Whenever we post the recording, we will also post the slides. So that will be on the Illinois Workforce Academy website. So that link is in the chat currently. So if you want to save that, you can also see all of the past webinars and any future webinars that you may have signed up for and missed. Those will be on that. Any other questions or concerns about the topic that was presented today? All right. If there isn't any, that is the Workforce Wednesday webinar for today. Again, the recording and the slides will be sent out. There is a follow-up survey in the chat, so that will also be sent out via email following the end of today's presentation. So like I said, that is the end for today.